Disclaimer: the information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GAN's processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
Okay, Alex, please take the screen, and we welcome your presence with us, and let's see what's in store for us today. I guess it's a combination of the fourth and fifth choices then, but whatever way it worked out, we're certainly glad you're with us and sharing, and not only here, but across this planet. So thank you again.
Well, thank you, Mark, and thank you all for attending today. It's a beautiful Sunday afternoon in North America, and as we all know, that the true power of the North American team comes from its attraction from all the participants from all around the world, from the other 5 continents. And so we thank you very much for giving your valuable time. We are experiencing a very important event, an existential crisis, and we are elaborating on the teachings of Marin Tabakoli Kesh of the Kesh Foundation. And so let us begin. This is the Kesh Foundation Spaceship Institute Teachings on Plasma Science. This is the Intermediate Outer Space series, and it's simply irresistible. My name is Alexander. I am from Canada. It is May the 14th, 2023. This is the Kesh Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. So we've seen that when we looked at the basic teaching series, and we see that the Brazilian community had a plan, and as such, we began this on October the 14th of 2020. And so we have continued until today to try and deliver this knowledge, and all the other teams have tried to translate this and make it available for all the newcomers. We can't wait. We have to move ahead. And so the archives provide a, shall we say, plasma highway for the new knowledge seekers to follow. And so we've graduated to the basic outer space series, and today we're in the intermediate outer space series. But please understand, this is still very basic. And we have to see, what is it that's so simply irresistible? So when we look at this search for outer space, there's a simply irresistible search for this outer space. And it's on the plasma highway to that pie in the sky, that little tiny red part we call man's universe, but it's so tiny compared to the rest of the universe. And we have to learn, how do we get from here to there? And so we see that in book number 2, The Structure of Light, shows us that the connection between here and there is this plasma highway, and we need to figure out how to travel on this highway, because we're quite literally stuck in man's universe. It's very tiny and very perfect, but you know, when we keep our eye on that pie, we just understand it's only a piece of the whole pie, and we lust for that. But we have a pie, but we dream of bigger pies, and this dream is simply irresistible, because the bigger pies are also simply irresistible. But the fact of the matter is, our dreams are just a piece of the whole pie, and we wonder, why do we just limit ourselves? And so we see that from our man space point of view, we have many emotions. And so the family of emotions of man space includes the emotion of man, the emotion of physicality, the emotion of presence. It affects our emotion of position, and from that position, it affects our emotion of vision. Well, that's good for man space, but we have to understand that we have a soul space point of view as well. And so preceding all of these emotions was the emotion of knowledge. But how did that happen? And so we find that the emotion of love is simply irresistible. And that's kind of universal, I would say. So when we're defining plasma, we see that plasma is in many different kinds of energy states. So any kind is an energy state. It's just a matter of what is your point of view. And so when we see all these different energy states, from matter state to radiance, it helps us not only understand our earth space, but helps us find our inner space. And this is so important when we're searching for outer space. Well, if that's not important, then nothing is important, is it? Because this is the answer to how the universe is created. And so when we look at the creation of the universe, we see that it exists from energy. And energy is a charged emotion. It is always emotion. And all things come in combination. So when we look at the cover of book number 1, we see the universal order of creation of matter. So we have the antimatter, dark matter, and the matter. And in many ways, this becomes kind of confusing, because energy is always positive. So the thing is, the charge reflects the motion of the energy. And if there's a motion, then it's between two things, at least two things. And is that in the same kind of energy state? Or can it transcend different energy states? Well, obviously it can, because the energy is a feeding pack. And so somehow the emotion of knowledge came here. And that came with the emotion of love. And we know that that is simply irresistible, because this is what's transcending the reality dimensions. And so this energy feeding pack has a gravitational stability. And we see that the energy flows both ways, doesn't it? But there's always a preference. And so what guides that preference? So that preference is actually a charge. And so that charge is either a magnetical emission or a gravitational absorption. And then the strength of that charge is dependent upon rotation, speed, the strength, and as a result, the direction. And so all of this is considered with magnetical and gravitational field forces. And so when we look at the electron-proton marriage, we see that it is a charge as well. And when charges come together, well, a marriage is a union, and it looks like it's in opposition. And so when we try and bring them together, and if it's done asymmetrically, we find that it doesn't exactly work. it develops a lot of friction. So to eliminate this friction, we have to make it symmetric. And once that's in that case, then we can combine them. So this is our physical anomaly. How do we get this electron-proton marriage? You know, this binary marriage. And the reason it's an anomaly is because we haven't determined if it's physical or if it's plasmatic. Well, the plasmatic is easy, but how does it manifest into the physicality? And so what we see is that this binding is non-visible. So this is how we've resolved this anomaly. And why is this binding non-visible? Well, because it's in balance. And so the energy can flow without that friction. And so what we have is a transition from one visible state to another visible state. So we have to understand that each state is in 3 dimensions. So the binding state is non-visible. So that's in a different dimension, not part of the original dimensions. And do we say which dimension are we referencing? No, we don't. We're just talking about the bonding dimension, which takes us from the plasmatic spectrum to the physicality spectrum. And so in the plasmatic spectrum, we can have this bonding dimension. And in the physicality spectrum, we can have this bonding dimension. But we can also have this bonding dimension between the plasmatic spectrum and the physicality spectrum. And did we mention which spectrum and which dimension? There is only one reality dimension, and that is the bonding dimension. And it doesn't matter where it is. So we're just going to call that the vanilla radiance. And so when we form our own travel agency, the Plasmagen Travel Agency, well, we don't have to form it. It's already been formed, you see. This is the reality. Because, you know, we were born to Earth. And many of us don't know how, and really we don't care to know how. But obviously we were born for a reason. Well, we don't know why, and we don't care to know why. And, you know, we want to travel to Mars. We don't know how, and we don't know why. But, you know, we don't care to know why. And in fact, we don't care to know why we were not born to Mars in the first place. So this is the vanilla radiance we're talking about when two forces come together. You know, is it just a dream where the PM ticks come together and form this combination of x-axis, y-axis, and z-axis? So you get to choose your planet, but you have to see your planet first. And so that planet is an inertia manifestation, and it's regardless of time and distance. And so now that you've chosen your planet, well, now you can go somewhere. So this explains why we have this field force. And within this field force, we have this physical energy we call gravity. And gravity seeks density, which is one of the reasons that the electron-proton marriage is working. But that becomes an atom. And atoms are magnetical. So the magnetical atoms are density seekers. So they're seeking out a gravitational connection. And so when we look at the orbits around the planet, we see that they are spiral orbits. And the reason for that is because they're gravitational. And that gravitational energy goes to the core. And so in that core is the most dense, and that's where we find this gravity. And so all of this is density seeking. And if we look at the plasma feeding rule, we see that there's natural creation and natural decay. And it's a two-way street. And so if it's a two-way street, we have to have some kind of stability. Unfortunately, in our life, the most stable thing is the sun. And it offers us a catalytic stability, which is the giving and taking of energy without consumption. And so whether it's a natural creation, catalytic stability, or a natural decay, in each and every energy state, it's a two-way street. That's the plasma feeding rule. But there are sequences. And so these follow the rules of attraction and repulsion, which we call magnetical and gravitational field forces. And with respect to us, it results in our feeding, and then, of course, in our feedback. You have to know when you're full, don't you? And you have to make that choice, and you're the last man standing. Because it's you. You make your own choices. And you can turn on and turn off this feeding. And you can increase or decrease this strength. And when you do that, you will enhance or diminish your position. But not to enhance or diminish as in terms of caste, in terms of ranking. It's just to alter your position with respect to field strength. That's all it is. And so when we look at the cups of life, what we're doing is we have this inner space strength, and it comes from an emotional strength, doesn't it? Because we built the cups of life. And so we created a Gans. So from the physicality, we created this Gans radiance manifestation. And we created copper Gans, calcium Gans, zinc Gans, carbon dioxide Gans, amino acid Gans, and water Gans. These are all part of the same process, you see. And you get a chance to fix things. So we have relationships, magnetical gravitational relationships. And we really got to fix a lot of things. There's a lot of things going wrong. So we have to be alert. Because it's not just about you, it's about your environment. And in our environment includes Earth. And so this relationship is between us, our soul radiance, and the Earth, which is another relationship we call inertia. And so when we look at the plasma inertial family, we see that we have solid glass, we have physical Gans, but we have a plasmatic hole in the middle, and we have plasmatic energy. And so we can believe what we see, or we can believe what we know. And this involves fundamentally an emotional feeding or an emotional feedback. And so it manifests itself with the physicality, or it could manifest itself in the dream. The knowing is in the dreaming. So when we look at the physicality and the manifestation from this dream state, we call it natural decay. And so we see that there's a plasmatic level that manifests into the physical level, but there are sequences. And so we see the isotopes of carbon, carbon-16, carbon-14, and they manifest into the physicality of carbon-12, which is an element on the periodic table of elements. But we created GANs. So we went from the physical and we created a plasmatic environment. And we see that there are other isotopes, carbon-10 and carbon-8. And so they have to follow in this sequence because the higher strength feeds the lower strength. And so in order of gravitational density seeking, we have to create this path. And so when we look at this creation, which is actually from rays and the motion of rays, we see that in a plasmatic situation, we can do natural creation. We've done that in the cups of life, but we understand that there's a natural decay at the same time because it's a two-way street. And then when we have the physicality, that is also natural creation, but we call it natural decay because, well, it's a two-way street. And so the connection between what we call a natural decay and a natural creation is actually a plasmatic creation and a connection to a physical creation. And those are different dimensions, different sets of three dimensions. And we are none of those three dimensions. We are the bonding factor. Also referred to as the Wedge factor. Because you see, our relationships are not complete. And when we say that 1 and 1 is more than 2, we are assuming that 1 and 1 is the same one, but it's not. We could say that 1 is a scientific responsibility, and we could say the other one is a spiritual responsibility. And either case, it's only half of the picture. But, you know, if we bring those two together and we find that it's more than 2, so in fact, that picture is less than half. And to affect that change, we have to have the plasma science to add to that knowledge. And not only, but also to affect the rate of change. So when we're talking about these relationships, scientifically, we see outer space as a field. And the connection to that field, as we discussed in book number 2, is a photon. And the connection to what? Well, it's our inner space. And so we do have this duality, this particle wave duality. So let's say the particle is magnetical and the wave is gravitational. But in each energy state, we see the coming together of matter, dark matter, and antimatter. And it's energy coming together from all different directions. And these energies packs are PM ticks, and they affect our relationships. So the inertia of relations can increase or decrease by at least an order of magnitude. This is very significant. And so we said that the rotation field and the speed of the rotation field affects the field strength. That strength has to be accommodated for by field relations. But which field relations? So it doesn't have to be the immediate neighbor. Well, the most dynamic change is in the neighbor. However, we can transcend multiple energy states. Just because we don't take that into account doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. Because you see, the Earth space is a kind of energy state, and it is quite diverse. I think you'll all agree. And furthermore, it's gravitationally stable. So as an energy state, that is the physical energy state. But inside it has its inner space, and that is also gravitationally stable, and it also is a different energy state. We have an inner space, and it is gravitationally stable. and it is an energy state. So something is causing us to be gravitationally unstable. So when we look at the plasma, we see it's bound to the ethos of the universe. Fortunately for us, the universe is very stable. And so to enhance our stability, we can't be in singularity or duality. We have to be in a trinity. So we see this plasma structure, what we call these star formations. But in order to bring them together, we have to have this plasma crossover point. So when we say this crossover point is binding energy, is non-visible. It's plasmatic. It's balanced. It's a maggrav condition. It's gravitationally stable. So the outlying star formations are magnetical. And they're not in opposition. They work together, combination, in a binary format. And so we have to understand that this is a two-way street. And so we understand that in our arsenal, we have a body enhancement unit. And this is excellent because it enhances our health. And so if we want to enhance our health, we have to feed our energies better instead of stealing energy. And so that feeding has to come from that plasma reality. But our problem is that we're feeding ourselves from our physical reality. And yet when we look at the material enhancement unit, and we see that it's gravitational, so that's kind of different from the GANs that we're producing in the cups of life, isn't it? Because we're taking the physical reality and creating this plasma reality we call GANs and the energy in motion. So the body enhancement we're feeding physically, and the material enhancement we're creating physically. But the reality is the soul is the source. And so the soul feeds the body enhancement. And so the material enhancement comes from the plasma reality and manifests itself into the physical reality. So we have plenty of evidence of this two-way street. Why are we only looking at it from the one point of view? So when we see this inertia manifestation, it too is an energy of a kind. So we're not specifying which kind. What we're saying is that the PM ticks are a magnetical feeding. And so it's feeding to a gravitational stable environment that is manifest through the combination of the principal matter, the transition matter, and the convergence matter. And in that process, it can convert. And it converts from that plasmagen state to that physical state. But it has to have a reference. So in its plasmagen state, it is gravitationally stable as a maggrav. But we haven't identified the maggrav because it needs a feedback. And so in our understanding, our feedback comes from the earth. And so this field interaction we call inertia is our feeding and the feedback we get from the earth. And so we've manifested in that case. The question then is, if we change the feedback, do we change our conformity? So here's what we do know, because when we look at the periodic table of elements, the fact of the matter is that the elements are elementary. So life is much more complex. So we like to identify all of these elements, like gold, silver, and copper. But you see, it's the sum of the parts that's greater than the sum of the parts. Which means if you know the details, you know about the copper, silver, and gold, and you want to bring all that together, it doesn't tell you how that happened, because you really don't have the details of knowing. You're only seeing one part of the picture, the elementary parts of the picture. So when we take all things in combination, we get to choose. So when we look at the carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and hydrogen, that's our amino acid. But when we look at the silicon, well, that's our earth. And when we look at the sodium, magnesium, potassium, and calcium, well, that's our medium. That's our transition state. And in addition to the silicon, we have iron, copper, and zinc. And that is an affinity which attracts us. Attracts us to what? It attracts our amino acid to, which is organic, to this inorganic planet, which is made from silicon. And so the connection is the iron, copper, and zinc, isn't it? These are the earth-space details. And this is very important because we can see that we can increase the superconductivity of these elements by creating a nanosphere state. And we could create multiple monatomic energy flows. And we can do this at room temperature. But we have to understand that we need 3 to complete the dimension. More than 3 is a polymer. Polymer is not human. It's just one of those stops on the plasma highway that connects us from the plasmatic state of the highest energy to an intermediate state of a lower energy to the physical state, which is the lowest energy. And back again, because that plasma highway goes in 2 directions. And regardless of where you are on this plasma highway, you know there's a connection to where you're going, and there's a connection to where you came from. And it is this relationship that identifies where you are. And so wherever you are, you're there. And so we came to this planet, and we're quite complex. And the fundamental structure is this amino star, which includes carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen. And we see that the anchorage to the Earth involves another star, the iron tetrahedron, which involves oxygen and iron. And so all of this comes from, well, thin air. But we find that in this air, we haven't decided if it's a physical air or plasmatic air, because there's a difference. And each and every element has a plasmatic connection and a physical connection. And the binding force is not visible. the plasmatic connection is also not visible. And you know about this anomaly because carbon is black and it's solid, but in its plasmatic condition, it's not visible. An amino acid forms that oily layer on the top of your cups of life. But the plasmatic amino acid is not visible. And so we see that the carbon as a gas comes in combination with oxygen. It has its own star. But interestingly enough, in the plasmatic state and in the physical state, in order to maintain this gravitational stability, there has to be a binary connection, a double bond. And so oxygen always comes in pairs. And we see the water molecule, and it's round, and it has to have gravitational stability. And it has to be symmetric. Can't be asymmetric. So really, the H2O formula is probably really not the elemental state of the water molecule, but it's probably H4O2. And then we have carbon with 3 hydrogens, but it's in a gaseous state called methane. And it has gravitational stability. So an individual carbon is asymmetric, but when you put the two together in a binary condition, it becomes symmetric and it achieves a gravitational stability. So that works. And so when we look at the amino star, we have to recognize that all of these elements are in their binary format. They don't work in singularity. Because if they were, then they would cease to exist in their elemental form or in their plasmatic form. And we all know that something is always something as opposed to being something else. So when we talk about the polymers, we see that what it is, we could take the amino acids and we can repeat them. And if we repeat them more than 3 times in succession, then they become a polymer. And that's what silk is, it's a polymer. But it comes from the gans, the internals. And it comes from a silkworm or a spider. But we could create polymers. We have a whole industry of polymers. But when you look at the fatty acid, you find that it has a repeating pattern. But not really. It has a water-soluble head, a water-soluble tail, and no, I was right. Water-soluble head and an oil-soluble tail. And it's invisible, and it's in balance. And so this connection between the hydrogens is this invisible field force. And we know these fatty acids are invisible because when we look at them under X-ray, we can't see them. But we know that we're organic human beings, and we know we're carbon-based. And so opposite attracts, and but there's still something wrong. This connection. And what's missing? It's this link that we all have. And this link travels at the speed of life. And what speed is that? I don't know. I guess it all depends on where you came from. But the thing is that this missing link is what bonds our human family together on this planet. It bonds all of us. And maybe we're impressed with the number of humans that we have on this planet. And we'll say, well, the planet is overpopulated at 4 billion. But when you look at our bodies, we have over 70 trillion cells in our body. Well, that's 4 orders of magnitude more. And so how do we communicate? And how do we create? And so we find that this transmutation process has manifested ourselves into this physicality. This transmutation process has manifested our earth space as well. And so we see that there are universal energies. And so they actually design our inner space spectrum. Okay, well, that's you. That's your feeding radiance. You have your DNA. That's the connection between the plasma radiance and the physical radiance, isn't it? Because you're now sharing this adaptation of earth space energies. So the balanced maggraph between your RNA and DNA comes from the combination of your chromosomes, the binding of the pairs. It always comes in pairs. And it allows us to have this physical manifestation. But we have become dependent on this physical manifestation. And so we need to have this feedback from our physicality so that we can maintain our balanced maggraph. So in essence, this feedback becomes a feeding mechanism. We depend on this feeding to maintain our physical manifestation. So clearly, any modification of this feeding system could affect us. And so then the question becomes, is it beneficial or is it adverse? We have to discuss that. Because we see, when we talk about the pH of the body, the potentiation of hydrogen, which is the pH, and we see that when our blood serum is alkaline, our DNA shrinks. And when it's healthy, it's at a certain state. And when it's acidic, it expands. And so what this does is it changes the communication. So are we talking about plasmatic DNA or physical DNA? You see, because time and distance does not matter. So if the DNA expands in an acidic state, that affects distance, communication distance. Therefore, what is affecting this acidic state? So this is a toxicity feedback. Is this toxicity feedback only from the environment? And we find in the other extreme, although it's a very, very small percentage, like less than 1% of the population have an alkaline problem. And that is a very severe problem because it's an extreme minority. But it too affects the distance in terms of the communication. And it could disrupt this communication. So when we were born, the thing that we found is that the materialization effect in the embryo is that the heart precedes the brain. So the emotion is dominant. And so this communication is dominant. This emotional communication is dominant and it's unseen. So it's a plasma calm type of communication. And it works between cells and within cells. And it offers us gravitational stability. So if we were to have this environmental disruption of this stability, we call that cancer. And so that cancer could develop as part of an organ and as such can grow if we don't have this pH stability. Is the physical toxicity the only change? So what is going on? So we find that the body needs energy. And in order to get this energy, it has to absorb this energy, flip it, so that it can be absorbed further and utilized. And we see that the way that the brain absorbs energy and the way the heart absorbs energy is different. So within the three dimensions, we have transmission, transition, and transmutation. But we have to allow a transformation, which is how energy crosses the blood-brain barrier. So we have this crossover point, which crosses over to this physical manifestation. Because when we look at the X-ray, all we see, well, we don't see much. We just see physical residue of bones and, oh yeah, cancer. And another part of this transformation could be transportation. I'm going to say, well, what's important in this regard? Well, our environment is very important. But what constitutes our environment? Is it only physical? So when we're looking at this conversion of energy, and we see that there's a gravitational on one side and a magnetical on the other side, and so this creates a balance. And so in terms of our physicality, we have this conversion from these isotopes into this stable carbon-12. Carbon-12 representing our physicality and the foundation of our physicality, but not only. It is the foundation of our environment. And so that creates an environment that brings us our brain. and it follows the heart emotion. And with this brain, we maintain this communication through to the plasma fields. The supragranular layer becomes the connection between the plasma fields and the physical fields. And so when these fields come together, yeah, we have these three dimensions: x-axis, which is magnetical, and y-axis, which is magnetical, and the z-axis, which is gravitation. But like we said, it's a two-way street. So we have to understand that there's a highway. There's a feeding and a feedback. And so to connect between this plasma origin and its physical destination, and the feedback from the physical destination to facilitate our plasmatic feeding, it has to cross over the supragranular highway in two directions. And so what we see is this transcendence through this supragranular connection. And so the x-axis becomes emissive, the y-axis becomes emissive, but the z-axis becomes absorptive. And it has to be absorptive. It has to be gravitational in order to maintain stability. And it is from there that it can communicate to the heart and then to the cells. And it does that through the emotion. Well, if it does that through the emotion, then we start to understand this carbon connection with this carbogen, because it's part of a nuclear creation, and we see that in the cover of book number 3, The Origin of the Universe. This connection between the soul of the body, and the physical body. As we see the connection with the universe, our sister universe, and our tiny little perfect universe. But the problem with our tiny perfect universe is we only get that little tiny pie in the sky, not the whole sky. And so we're now embarking on a new kind of soul travel. Because we have to understand it. We have to understand that there's a soul of inertia. And so the star formation inertia, which gives us gravitational stability, means that we have to have a convergence and a divergence coming together and creating another divergence and another convergence, because it's a two-way street. And the gravitational stability is the conversion of these two energy flows into inertia. And this allows us to dream of bigger pies. But we've created a kind of a limitation, because we have the physical field. We know that, the carbon 12. And we have the connection field, the intermediate field, the carbon 14 and the carbon 10. And so there's a plasmatic and a physical connection, isn't there? But it's not enough. Because if we look at the plasmatic connection on the highest level, we find that the combination of C16 and C8 is actually C24. And it's interesting that on the intermediate plasmatic manifestation, we have a connection of C14 and C10. And the reason I'm bringing these two together is because of the attraction forces of the gravitational and magnetical force fields. And so the highest level creates a C24 combination. The intermediate level creates a C24 combination. But when we get into the physical materialization, which we call gravity and magnetic forces, on the periodic table of elements, we only get C12. So clearly, our nuclear science is limiting us, and we have to transcend that, because we have to understand that our radiance creation involves the ethos of the universe. And as such, we now have to take into account morality, compassion, and courage. These are all fundamental components of creation. And so when we look at these energy binding forces, and we need to have these energy binding forces because these are part of the gravitational absorption fields. But do we have to do this at the expense of others? Because if you understand that if you're drawing from the physical energy, which is the lowest energy, you're not only getting less, but the person you're cheating, lying, and stealing from, or in extreme cases, murdering, they're being denied their energy. And you're responsible. So, why are you wanting less by drawing from the least? So we understand that the matter plasma dimensions involve a physical matter state, which is small m matter state, and that's gravitational, isn't it? But the feedback is going to this mattergen state, so that the mattergen state can give us more feeding. But this mattergen state is magnetical, and we can't touch it or see it. So we're ignoring the feeding of the mattergen state, and we're only feeding ourselves from the physical feedback state. So the man's dilemma is man is feedback dominant. I guess that's why we're always hungry. So we talked about this in the past, and now we have new information, and we have to deal with the dilemma man. And the question is, can a mortal man become an immoral man? Well, you don't have to go far in history to check that out. All you have to do is check the daily news, and you see that, yes, mortal man can become an immoral man. So if we say, well, thou shalt not kill, a moral man will never do that. So why does a mortal man kill? So can a mortal man be a moral man? Well, yes, a mortal man can. Can a moral man be a moral soul? Well, yes, a moral man can be a moral soul. But what about an immoral man? Can an immoral man be an immortal man? No. Can a moral man be an immortal man? Yes. Okay, so now we define two parameters. So what about a mortal man? Can a mortal man be an immortal man? So this is a good question. Let's see if we can find a good answer. So can a mortal man be an immortal soul? Yes, a mortal man can be an immortal soul. Well, what about an immoral man? Can an immoral man be a moral soul? Yes, yes. An immoral man can be a moral soul. This is a dilemma, isn't it? So we have a soul dilemma. So can an immoral soul be an immoral soul, immortal soul? We could also ask, can an immortal soul be a moral soul? And the answer is yes. So therefore, a moral soul is an immortal soul. But the dilemma man has faults, failings, and weaknesses. And we come to a real dilemma. You see, because there's no such thing as an immoral soul. All souls are moral. So an immoral man is really a disconnected soul, not the soul of the body, the soul of the man. So, in fact, the PM-TIC matter-gen state can become disconnected. But it can continue to exist in its matter state because it has the plasmatic physical contact and connection. But it only has that connection to an intermediate state. It doesn't have it to the highest energy state. So we find that this connection is missing. This top highest energy state is what's missing. So can we reconnect this? So the new technology says, yes, we can. But we still have this asymmetric anomaly. We only have the carbon-12 in the physical state, whereas in the others, the combinations come up with carbon-24. And there's another funny anomaly is we have 23 chromosomes. So how does that work with our amino acids? Well, the physical can be resolved very easily because you see the carbon-12 is an element. And so if you're looking at any type of physicality, you have to look at these atoms combining. And so atoms can combine in their own sequence. So carbon connect to a carbon, copper connect to a copper, iron connect to iron. Or we can have, say, carbon connect to an oxygen, copper connect to an oxygen. Well, in fact, copper can connect to an oxygen, and zinc can connect to an oxygen, and carbon connect to a hydrogen. So we have all these possibilities, and these are all done in the physicality, and depending on how we do it, we can operate in the physical state and in the plasmatic state. So we find that the combination of two carbon atoms together creates a physical carbon. Well, there you go. Anomaly is resolved. But we still have the problem with our humanity. Because you see, our biological family operates on a different basis. So, we have parents, and then we marry offspring of another set of parents. And then when we marry, we create children. This is our biological family. And so we find that our inertia field comes from the plasma state, from the soul. And the combination of these two creates an offspring in the plasma state. And so we find that the combination of this offspring, what we call the emotion of love, or the glint in daddy's eye, or the power that is simply irresistible, can create an offspring, and that has to be created before the physicality, because it has to go into a physical womb to manifest into physicality. So that means the connection between the 23 pairs of chromosomes and the plasmatic connection between the parents resolves that 23 plus 1. So we resolved another anomaly. This is very good. So we see that all of this has to do with relationships. So we talked about the outer space relationship of the fields and the photons, the inner space relationship of the particles and the waves. So we understand the cell space relationship, which involves the soul of the man and the soul of the body. It is from the cell space that we create the physical space. So the physical space involves the inner space of man space. Have we decided the inner space of this environment space? Well, we have, at this point in time, decided that this environment space is Earth space. But if we change the environment, then that would be a different environment space, wouldn't it? And it too would have an inner space. And so the reality is that we can have a physical space in that new environment as well, because it will interact with the inner space of our space. These are new relationships, and they all have to do with the plasma science. And so the dilemma man, can an immortal soul be a moral man? Well, yes. What's man's problem? We still have the dilemma, don't we? Because the moral man is in the minority, and it's serious. So the irresistible force comes from our radiance points. It's the radiant you. That doesn't come from the physical you. It doesn't come from the soul of the body you. It comes from the soul you, the moral you, the radiant you. It's part of the ray creation. It's part of the emission spectrum. This is your launch field. And you can land wherever you want. This is the ray absorption field. And you can do this at light speed. And the light speed is the speed of light in each and every energy state. You just have to choose the energy state. And when you're in that energy state, you have to maintain this gravitational stability. And because it's a two-way street, you have this feeding radiance and this feedback radiance. So you have to go through this radiance pole flipping to go from the magnetical plasma to the gravitational plasma. But in all cases, it's a feeding plasma, which means it's a magnetical plasma. It's the feedback plasma, which is the gravitational plasma. So in other words, when we look at the family of motions, which includes the vision, the position, and the presence, if we want to maintain this stability, we have to elevate. to a higher radiance inertia and involve our souls, the moral soul. So now we understand the manifestation a little bit better. All plasma feeding leads to a manifestation. Any field formed is a manifestation. And so that can be non-tangible or tangible, non-visible or visible. And so we see there's a plasmatic reality and a physical reality. So if the emotion of presence is a form artifact of energy in motion at that manifestation point, then we see that the emotion is the connection. And so here we are, we're searching for outer space. The reality is that what we're focusing on is the materialization. And so to go from one to the other, you have to cross this reality dimension. This reality dimension is the radiant you. One moment, please. So there are inanimate souls, there are vertical souls, horizontal souls, and there's the souls of humanity. They all represent the family, and they all represent the biodiversity. And then within these families, we have another diversity. So you are just one part of that diversity of the souls of humanity. Family. And there's a connection through this plasma emotion. This plasma emotion which balances the natural creation and the natural decay. And it connects us to our earthbound field and creates this inertia field, which we call our reality. But we're not part of that reality. We are the creators of that reality. We're the bonding fudge factor, remember? So the earth has its own bonding factor. It has a binding energy because it's absorbing in, and more energy is coming in through the gravitational field forces of attraction. And to maintain the maggrav position, it is emitting out and emitting more out through the magnetic force fields of repulsion. And so there's an in and an out, absorption and emission, this feeding inertia, and physically called a lust feeding. But how is that different? Well, what's different is that we see that when we, depending where on Earth we could do elemental groupings. So one group would be like copper, silver, and gold. They belong to the same group of family, but they're different, and they're all elementary. But then we look at oil, and oil is not an element. And so we find that each of these are in their specific place on Earth. So we have copper mines, oil fields, gold mines. But the Earth space itself has a soul, and it is not an element. And humans have a soul, and that's not an element either. In fact, it's quite complex. Because first of all, our man space involves our souls, our emotion, and our physicality. And that has to take into account our environment. And we walk on this planet So we have this problem when we look at our planet. The planet is round and it rotates. We don't rotate, we walk on the planet. And so we only walk on the biosphere range, which is in between the magnetical peace dome and the gravitational core. The soul of the earth is in the core. And so we've had to resolve this anomaly by looking at the fact that it's actually our cell space, which is in the same construct, magnetical gravitational force field that is communicating with each other. And 73 trillion cells work very, very well. And we start as a conception. We manifest in the womb. We get born as babies and we grow up into be adults. And we're always doing this in our own man space cocoon. And fortunately for us, space. And so our pursuit of happiness, we find that's always been a launch field failure because it's been simply indefensible. Man has never launched a rocket into outer space. And so we have to figure out, do the Earth space rules apply to inner space or outer space? Well, if we understand what we consider to be Earth space and what we consider to be rules are man-made rules. So when we look at Earth space, inner space, and outer space, it follows the universal laws. And the proof of concept is that we have this preference and sentimentality for Earth space. So we were born from radiance. We were born using the outer space system. And we were born into the inner space of Earth and the inner space of man space, the combination. And that combination was simply irresistible. And so as we travel down the plasma highway, we find that outer space is not a place. It's a relationship between you and your radiance. And outer space is a method of energy transfer, so it's energy in motion. And so what does that mean? We have dynamic soul plasmas. We have the soul of the creator, the soul of the earth, the soul of family of humanity, the soul of man, the soul of the body, the soul of the cells, and this simply irresistible lust for life. And we know that because when the soldiers leave, after they've trampled all the flowers, the flowers come back. So this is where science meets the soul of man for peace. So we have the science of physics, the science of spirituality, the science of the soul, and nowhere do you see the science of money. And this is why our visitors are so excitable, because they have their own dream. And so, well, we have our dream, but they have, well, we call it a reverse dream. Well, which reality dimension did they come from? And wherever it was, it obviously is their simply irresistible dream, isn't it? Because they came here pretty quick. And so the emotion of love is simply irresistible, isn't it? That's a question. We have to cross this inner space peace bridge because we are inherently peaceful. That's our magnetical stability. That's who we are. And this peace connection to the plasma outer space highway is simply irresistible. Ask anyone on this planet and they will tell you the same thing. And speaking of the planet, ask the planet, because the planet peace dome is the inner space dome. the inner space dome. The planet is the peace dome. And it depends on us to contribute to it, not to steal from it. So now we understand something new. We have this plasma highway, and humans may transport on Earth space. But the new technology allows humans to transmute in outer space. And the connection is the emotion of love. But the connection is not an element. The connection is an energy pack. Therefore, love is not an emotion. Love is energy, an energy that's in motion, and it is simply irresistible. We are in the post-June 6, 2022 era where we can make choices, and we see this transparency point that comes into this manifestation point, the enhancement of our inner space. And so we can navigate between outer space and Earth space, or any space. And so we need to change the moral structure of this planet. And so on Friday, May 26th, we'll be talking about elevating the soul of children. Book your tickets now. It'll be another great event. And there will be an encore in June. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute Teachings on Plasma Science, calling all Earth space sweethearts. Fulfill your dreams by shedding the old limits of your soul growth. There's a World Peace Treaty. Sign it. Sign it with a pen. Sign it with your heart. Sign it with your soul. The emotion and vision allows our fields of life choices free from the boundaries or abuse. Read the emotional position map. The universal community is your travel guide. And the speed of love manifests and determines your inner space emotional constructs. The earthbound soul family requires a gravitational transformation, enhancing the physical and emotional vitality. So the emotion of knowledge is the transmutation connection to that manifestation point, and connects equally to the universal broadcast of inner space of freedom. The plasma outer space highway is built by Earth space lovers and shareholders. Life is simply irresistible. Plasma science needs to continue to be delivered in exchange for peace on Earth. So welcome to the outer space age. And that's the end of this lesson, and that's the end of this intermediate outer space series. Thank you all. I hope you enjoyed the trip. Over to you.
Well, thank you again, Alex. You've certainly packed a lot of knowledge into a short period of time, and a lot for us to contemplate and think about. And we're wondering if anyone would like to ask a question or raise a point in Alex's presentation, or maybe something from the last workshop. Okay, Alex, when you showed the amino acids, the hydrogen, the carbon, and the oxygen in one of your slides, why was there no nitrogen? Is the nitrogen showing itself as hydrogen, or I didn't notice an N in there? And I would think on the amino acids, there would be a nitrogen in there. Or did I miss your point you were trying to deliver completely? It was one of the earlier slides.
I'm drawing together a lot of stuff that we did initially to
Okay.
maintain some kind of continuity, and I think that's the case. You just missed it. Now
I might have missed it.
on some of those other slides, I've been going a lot faster.
Not sure. Yeah, the fatty acids, I think. Yeah.
Oh, the fatty acids.
Was that
Okay?
No.
This is the amino stars. This is not the one you were referring to.
No, the one where you said it had a head and a tail. The tail was.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah.
Had the H's above it and below it. Maybe you can just go a little bit deeper into what you were trying to share with us there. Yes, that's the one. Balanced magrav is invisible. I see a lot of H's. See the carbon, the oxygen, but where is the nitrogen, or it wasn't supposed to be in there?
The amino acids are the building blocks for the DNA. The DNA then becomes fatty acids. So the conversion of the nitrogen manifests itself into either a carbon or an oxygen. Because the nitrogen, if we were to go back, so let's make sure that we understand that there's a difference between fatty acid and amino acid.
Oh, okay. I thought you were saying the fat that we see on top of the CO2 box, which I understand is amino acids, and I thought you were referring to that.
The amino acids are the building blocks of life. So this is what we see in the cup of life. So when we create amino acid, we create water at the same time. So you find that there's nitrogen in the amino acid, but there's no nitrogen in the water. There's only hydrogen and oxygen in the water.
Okay.
So there's no nitrogen here either. So when you look at the difference at hydrogen, it has a mass of 1, and the water molecule has a mass of 8. The combination of water and oxygen is 9. And 9 is 1 less than 10, which is an order of magnitude difference. So when you look at the pH table, you see that going from 1 to 2 is an order of magnitude jump. And so we determine the pH, which is the potentiation of hydrogen. As it goes from 1 to 2, the potentiation increases. In order for it to increase, it has to be bound. And so we find that when we become alkaline, we become gravitationally bound. So the potentiation is the highest. So when we look at, let's say, for instance, an acid like a hydrochloric acid, it's bubbling. And the reason it's bubbling is because the hydrogen is being released. It is no longer a potential, it is a kinetic. There's a difference between the potential energy and the kinetic energy. So the release of the hydrogen is a kinetic force, and that force can be done plasmatically or physically. There's a potential for the hydrogen, and that is in the alkaline state, and that gives its gravitational stability, and that too can be in a plasmatic state or a gravitational or physical state. Now here's the thing: water and oil don't mix. Water and oil don't mix, and yet we created a cup of life, and we created oil. And so because oil and water don't mix, we find that the oil was sitting on top and the water is on the bottom. And so the reason for that is because of the high amount of oxygen in the water, so the water being more dense than the oil. The mass of the oxygen is 8, but the mass of the nitrogen is 7, and the mass of the carbon is 6. So you see, this is why the water is more dense. So that's why it goes down. But what is more dense than oxygen? Well, silicon. And isn't it interesting that oxygen and silicon are in the same family? And yet the oxygen is essential to both. And so when we look at the amino acid structure and we see that, well, what is giving us, see, there's no oxygen in the CH3. And this is why the CH3 is lighter than air. But when we look at the amino star and actually see how much oxygen is in there. So it's way more than what we thought. And then when you look at the upper atmosphere and you see that we have ozone, and what is ozone? It's O3. And yet it's in the upper atmosphere. Why is that? Because it's plasmatic. There's a big difference between the ozone in the upper atmosphere and the ozone at the ground level. And so when we look at carbon dioxide, and we know that carbon dioxide is heavier than air, okay, why is it so heavy? Well, look at the mass. 2 oxygens, that's 8 and 8 is 16, plus the carbon is 24. Oh, there's that 24 again. So it's heavier than air. So the carbon dioxide goes to the bottom. And so we find that if we are in a heavy carbon dioxide atmosphere, then we can suffocate. But we are breathing carbon dioxide in our lungs. Supposedly, we are inhaling oxygen and exhaling carbon dioxide. But if the carbon dioxide is toxic to us, then how come we're not breathing and then exhaling? And the reason is because that carbon dioxide is life-giving. And if that carbon dioxide is life-giving, then it has to be plasmatic. And so with the new CO2 generator, we can put out a fire, a forest fire, without killing all the animals in the forest fire. Now, in our cup of life, when we create a CO2 gas, that is physical. So what is the difference? The difference is, from the physical aspect, we create the CO2 gas as a form of creation. When we create the CO2 gas from the carbon generator, we are going through a decay process. We're drawing down from the highest plasmatic energy level to an intermediate plasmatic energy level. Higher level to a lower plasmatic level. right?
Okay.
Let me just
Yeah.
bring this up. So the C14 is the connection. And if we're talking about a connection, we're talking about connecting two things. We are connecting the highest energy plasmatic level and the lowest energy level, which is our physicality. That's the C14 connection. That's the intermediate connection. Back to you, Mark.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Would someone else like to participate? Now, when you said an immoral man was that a yes or a no? When you said an immoral man can become immortal?
Well, yes, isn't that
This is the whole problem we're trying to correct, isn't it? Because the soul of this planet had a wrong streak in it. And obviously it's been around for, I don't know, 1 billion years or more. And that's kind of immortality in a way, isn't it? So an immoral man can become immortal. And this is the problem or the mistake or a mishap in the process of creation that is what is being corrected, as I understand.
well, let's clarify something here. The immortality aspect of it isn't with the physicality. The immortality is with the soul. And the soul is moral.
Well,
so the moral soul is the immortal soul. So can an immoral man become moral? Yes. And the reason is because he's not connected to his soul. It's not the soul that's the problem. It's because the soul is feeding him. It's the feedback that's the problem.
but the soul of this planet had a wrong streak in it
Well,
and
the
resulted
soul
in,
of this planet is fine. Okay, because when the soldiers leave, the flowers grow. So the soul of the vertical people and the soul of this planet does not have a problem. But we have come to a different manifestation point. We're not the inferior ones. But that's not to say that we're the superior ones. What we are is enhanced. We have an enhanced capability. Okay, so every car has a benefit, but some cars are luxury cars and some cars are, just 4 wheels and an engine. So we are an enhanced species and we can do more. But the only way that we can operate is through the feeding from our soul. And if we become so arrogant that we have to feed ourselves from the feedback of this environment, and now we realize that the feedback from the environment does not only come from the earth space, because if we feed ourselves from this earth space, that's not a problem. It's the feedback from the pollution on this earth space that is the problem. And earth space is not the culprit. Earth space did not pollute itself. Earth space created elements, bountiful elements, which the vertical and horizontal people also enjoy. But we have created a pollution. We have created a toxicity. We have created a disconnect. And why would man kill man? For the science of money, there's no such thing. And can we break that chain? We've tried thousands and thousands of years. So now what we have to do, we have to change the playing field. We can't operate on Earth space. We can't operate even on the intermediate space. We have to reconnect the soul. Reconnect the soul to the highest energy state. Complete the picture. Because this connection point is a connection from the higher state to the lower state. Otherwise, it's just like a dog chasing his tail. And we get nowhere fast.
Thank you. Would someone else like to raise a point or make a comment?
Then who created money?
Mm-hmm. Follow the money.
Yeah,
You,
but
you will get your answer.
I think not only money, there is other thing too, like power and slavery, those kinds of stuff too.
Well, yeah, because we have been treated like a commodity to be traded.
Right, I think a lot of the problem came, money is just supposed to be a medium of exchange. But when they started speculating on money and funds and all these different hedge funds and things and bets on other bets, this is where some of the problem came in the matter state, where it's being disconnected from the economy, let's say, in a way. But it's just a means or a lubricant in a way to keep things moving. But once they started speculating on it, it sort of threw things off. Not that it wasn't off already, but it's taken it to another level, I think.
Well, so let's remember that the initial purpose was for the necessities of life, which are air, food, water, and shelter. And then everything beyond that is an extravagance.
Right. And we used to have fixed exchange rates, basically, and now they sort of float all over the place where you can drive a currency down. You can boost a currency, but yeah, I think all this speculation has taken it to a way off the chart level. All these side bets and is this going up, down, and so on. So this created a lot of havoc and uncertainty as well, where countries want to buy things or other countries want to sell things, but they never know what the exchange rate is going to be. It seems to float all over the place. So this has created a lot of havoc as well on this planet.
Mark,
Yes.
the problem of the money is the value each person gives to that piece of paper or coin. And everybody thinks that the other person is paying him a lesser value. That's a big problem. There's, in fact, this morning I watched a video. It lasts about 10 minutes. It's the way extraterrestrials see the way we think about money. It's very interesting. And it's in English. It's in English and in Spanish, but I listen to it in English. The Pleiadians, the way they see the way we live. And, very interesting information.
Right, and then you put interest on top of that. I could
Exactly,
see
because we
1%.
don't believe in the value.
Yeah. I could see 1 or 2% maximum, but when you get into these high interest rates, it's again creates a lot of havoc for a lot of people, and to keep them in a condition where they're working their whole lives just to get out of the debt that's been created by the structure. So,
and if you look into the stock exchange, the way they value or devalue stocks, that's incredible.
well, I think we'll still be using money for quite a while until we all walk away from it and realize it's
in the same explanation, they talked about the value of gold, because the value of gold is given in the whole of the universe. But there is gold and there is gold. And Mr. Kesh has also told us this. If you got mined gold, it has a value. But if you have a generated gold, a made gold is different.
well, he seems to be talking about bringing all of these things, copper and the rest of it, down to a $500 a ton level once the material enhancement.
Well, exactly. There's a big difference, because there is a difference in that value also. That's why when you want to wear jewelry, you have to have a real gold taken from a mine. If you got fabricated gold, it hasn't the same spirit, let's put it this way.
Yes, should be like that.
There's a big difference.
Well, the samples I think Mr. Kesh sent for test to the Chinese, it did register as pure gold, but it didn't have any point of origin because it was
Exactly.
out of
The same with the diamonds. The diamonds he used to make. And the diamonds we're sold today, it's all a fabricated value. In fact, the diamond dust is being used for grinding stones.
Yes, impregnated.
And what's the value? You can buy grinding stones for cents.
Yeah, it's part of the change, but again, we'll still have this medium of exchange until we walk away from the money and realize it's, again, take the money into the universe and it's totally worthless.
But what Mr. Kish is teaching us, this will bring a big change, and in a very accelerated way, I see it, the way I see it.
Good. Would someone else like to come in and open up something that Alex has just covered, or maybe something from the last workshop? I was thinking about this relationship, Alex, between the electron and the proton. I was reading in the first book about the electron's function is to keep the proton in its right position and also to collect energies that are released by the proton and feed it back into the proton. Apparently, the electron moves, collects some of the energies, and feeds it back into the proton. Are there other functions of this electron? There are probably many, but those are the two I remember from book number 1 on this function of the electron in relation to the proton. Keep it in position and also to collect any energies given off by the proton and feed it back into the proton to maintain its strength and position, as I understand it. Anything you'd like to add on that? I know you covered a little bit in your presentation.
I would look at it at a different level also. If we think of the proton as a sort of a physical representation of the atom, and as you said, the electron is the energy. The energy is it's 1,800 times less massive. The mass of the electron is 1,800 times less.
Yes, Alex covered this a number of times. The
Yeah.
difference in the mass.
So
yeah.
would be the electron be the energy of the proton, and when it separates from the proton, from the neutron, when it separates, you got the proton and the energy. We're looking at the neutron as proton plus energy.
Would you like to add a little bit more on this, Alex?
Yeah, yes. So if we look at the electron-proton combination, is called an atom. But that atom is exclusively the hydrogen atom. And so if we add a neutron, then it becomes deuterium. And if we add another neutron, then it becomes tritium. And every other element on the periodic table of elements has a neutron. So the only electron-proton marriage that does not have a neutron is the hydrogen. And a PM tick is an energy pack. And so when we look at the hydrogen, its structure is hydrogen in physicality, but it's also a PM tick in the plasmatic reality.
And we're also told that all the elements on the table are sort of the same hydrogen in a combination. Mr. Kesh says we have to restructure the Mendeleev table because it's not real. You got different levels of hydrogen, call it energy or massive way.
Yeah, certainly. Just like we have different levels of energy of the carbon.
Yeah, but the carbon, what is carbon? 6 hydrogens or 7 hydrogens in the carbon-14.
Yes, but it also has neutrons.
But if I was talking about the proton and the electron, they come out of the neutron, or the neutron is a neutral proton. It hasn't got rid of the energy.
So when we create a ray, that is the residue from the creation or the transition from the neutron to the electron-proton combination. That difference in mass has always been fudged. And that difference in mass is the release of the PM ticks. So we still have a gravitationally stable structure in a neutron, and we have a gravitationally stable structure in an atom. But if you look at the relationship of the electron to the proton, you know, it doesn't seem to be very fair. But the proton is the gravitationally stable one, and the electron is not gravitationally stable. It's magnetically stable. So what we have been doing in terms of drawing energy, we have gone down one level lower into the physicality. So the physical science is the lowest energy level. The plasma science is a higher energy level. But in the, shall we say, the study of the plasma science, we find that there are multiple levels on a plasmatic level. And on one of those levels, the soul of the body operates, because the soul of the body is that intermediate state between the plasma energy and the physical energy. But it's the soul of the man that depends on the soul of the body to be able to interact. You will never find a soul of the man in a physical body without the soul of the body. Because the physical body is a field of inertia. And that means it's a combination field of two other fields.
Okay.
Can I say something in here?
Yes.
Hi, Selena.
Hi, how are you? Alex, sometimes when I do meditation, I go out of my body, and sometimes it doesn't happen anything. But sometimes when I stay in the deep meditation, suddenly I feel, you know, if you stay in the quiet place, still there is a noise, right? Everywhere. So suddenly, when you are deep meditation, you feel there is no noise. I feel few time, not few time, a lot of time, but recently I am studying that. So there is no noise. Suddenly I feel there is no noise, and everything get dark, very dark. Nothing is there. And there is a space noise, void noise, void. When you stay in the void, you know, there is a noise, different kinds of noise. It stayed there. And it is different feelings. And I didn't know what is that. I was sometime thinking about that, but I never find out what is that. Then recently, 2 days ago, not recently, 2 days ago, I heard one of the spiritual guy, Joe Dispenza. I think so, you know, a lot of people know him, Joe Dispenza. He was a doctor, and then he broke his spinal God, and then he fixed it, and then he changed his life path. So that teacher is saying about when we stay in the atom, that time is everything dark and the noise is not there. So I'm thinking in the meditation, do I go to the inside the atom? And if I go to the inside the atom, and another thing he said, everything create from there. So if we touch that place, that means we can create everything, right? Do you know about anything? Anything about that place or anything? Any information, whatever it is.
So we have to, let me see, is my microphone on?
Yes.
Yeah. So let me explain. If you are hearing, it's physical. If you're not hearing, it's plasmatic. It's the difference between the tangible and the non-tangible. And it's the same with color. If you see the color, then it's physical. However, you yourself and your memory are in a physical state. But when you were born, you didn't have a physical memory. You didn't have a physical sound. You didn't have a physical color. So you were depending on the feeding of the emotion of knowledge. And the energy that drives this emotion of knowledge is the energy of love. We think of love as an emotion. I've come to realize now that love is not an emotion. The emotion of knowledge is an emotion. The emotion of position is an emotion. The way we interpret love as a physical love is actually coming from lust. There's a big difference. So the lust is like a physical sex, but the love is a creation energy. And that is the energy that you were born from. So you are, in fact, an inertia field that's come together from two other fields.
So could this love be the emotion of giving?
Yes, exactly. And that's the only way it works. Because when we go back to this we see that the release of the PM ticks is actually given off by the neutron.
Would anyone else like to come in unless you haven't finished, Alex?
Thank you. Thank you, Alex.
Oh, no, thank you. It's an excellent question. I know. I don't want to dominate the conversation. I just want to enhance the conversation. But, you know, what we have to look at is when we look at these universal enhancement units, we see the one's a material enhancement, one's a body enhancement. Well, the body is us in physicality that we want to enhance, whereas the material is material that we want to create and bring it into the physicality. So you see, one works on a magnetical basis, one works on a gravitational basis. So if you're drawing it in, it's gravitational. If you're emitting it out, it's magnetical. And so you are what you emit. You have to emit before you can receive. And the thing is, you have a choice. So plasma can interact with other fields, or it can be a boundary. And this is very important. If oil and water didn't have a boundary, then you would be a bag of mush. But interestingly enough, when oil and water get into a high pH situation, such as caustic soda, what do you create? Well, you create a nanocoating. What you've done there is you've taken that physicality and elevated it to a nano state. And so nano state is a physical state that is at a higher energy level than the atomic state on a physical. Or to paraphrase that, the atomic state of physicality versus the monatomic state of plasma reality, even though they're both physical. So we have a capability not only of having different energy states in the plasma reality, but we have different energy states in the physical reality. And so in the early classes, we have talked about going from physical to nano to GANs, and then we started to see the creation of force fields where we have an emotional cup, we have a physical cup, we have the cup of the soul, we have the cup of the earth and the cup of the inertia. And so we have been able to create all those different energy states from our physicality. But the earth space and the man space was not created that way because the physicality had to be here first to be able to create it from the physicality. So where did this physical space come from? So it came as a result of an inertia field between the soul of the sun and the soul of the earth. And that had to precede the arrival of man. So there's a sequence. That's what I'm talking about. So we have the material enhancement, where the energy is coming from the plasma reality to the physical reality, and we have the body enhancement, where we're connecting the physical reality to the plasma reality of the feeding. And we need to do this not only to draw energy from the soul, but to reconnect from our soul, because man will never kill man if he follows the universal laws of the soul. So the only way that we can do that is to say, oh, you know what, I'm disowning my soul. I sell my soul. Well, you sell your soul. You've just curtailed everything that you're capable of and put severe limits on your abilities. And that's not why we came here. That's in direct violation of why we came here. So we have to remember, if our memory is only in the physical and everything around us is a physical enhancement and a feedback, then we forget why we were born, because we were born with the emotion of knowledge. And we've been discounting that all the time. We now have to account for it. But, you know, when you're inundated 24/7 with this ridiculousness, and then you find that you only get into these meetings and they last a short period of time. I know our meetings are very long, but we talk about essential things and we'll get a lot covered. So we get a chance to hash this out.
And there is a lot to cover, isn't there? Would anyone else like to bring something up here? Well, this will be my final question. Mr. Kesh said about we need to, or he's going to start teaching this composition or mixing of energies. I think it's for speed and dimension. But in the workshop, he mentioned, would you like to travel at the strength of uranium, or would you like to travel at the strength of helium? I'm not sure what he's actually referring to, but maybe Alex, you can help us understand this a little bit more. Or your thinking on this point.
Well, yeah. Every element on the periodic table of elements has a GANS. Every element. We can have a GANS of a GANS. So in other words, before the GANS becomes strictly a plasma state, which is totally invisible, we can create another GANS from that GANS. Because that GANS then will become an inertia field. And so when you look at the cups of life and you see that we all have, maybe 4 elements in there. And then you look at these universal enhancement units with over 400 elements. I think you can understand that the combination of possibilities, and if you only were to combine 4 at a time, so it wouldn't be in the hundreds, it would be orders of magnitude more than that. And so that's the difference in the capabilities. And you know that because when you look at Earth space and you see the biodiversity on Earth space, and you say, wow, obviously more than 4 elements created that. So if you look at any one of those elements, then they have a mass. And that mass will affect the inertia field. We have the capability of choosing which inertia field we would like to do. This is a new technology. This is a new science. This is a new understanding. We've never had a chance to make these choices before. And
but it also has to be taught, he said.
Well, yes, of course.
Yeah.
Because what are we taught? And what's the school? Social media. Social media is the school. The cell phone now is our teacher. So, we're already at the lowest energy level, and now we are drawing more energy from another lower energy level. That's preposterous, so we are compromising for some kind of assumed reason where we are abdicating our responsibility. So for years and years, that's all I've heard. Oh, I don't want to get involved. I don't want to get involved. And frankly, I was a firm believer of that because, as long as it's not in my backyard, I don't care. But, if I get mugged on the way home, chances are I'm the drug dealer. Okay, because the guy who's mugging me needs the money to buy the drugs from me, but he doesn't know. So, they say, you create your own bed and then you sleep in it. So it's just like our community is part of our environment. Even a dog doesn't defecate in the cage. Put a dog in a cage and you'll find that it'll hold it until you come and open the gate. And then the dog will quickly go and, so, well, where did the dog learn to do that? How come the dog is so polite? Did you, really have to train the dog to do that? Or does the dog have a sense of decency? Inherent in his DNA. So this is the new reality. And this capability is a new capability. Before I hand it back to you, Mark, I would like to say deep gratitude to the Brazilian community And, you know, when I look at all the Telegram channels, and Canada is at the bottom, and you know what? We intend to stay there. That's the mentality that we have. We don't want to relinquish that position. We've worked hard to achieve that. But you look at the Brazilian community, and they're right up there. And you look who's leading it. You know, it's with Rafael and the power of the team that he's assembled. And if I start naming names, then I'm going to omit certain names. But, you know, you started this session with that presentation, and I need to extend my thanks to Claudia for putting that together. That was quite impressive, and I owe a lot of thanks to that. So it's the Brazilian community that got me on this journey, and we're now completing the intermediate outer space series, and we have to carry on. We're going to be starting the advanced outer space series. And do you think I know what I'm talking about? I will continue with this until someone can replace me, because that's the only way we'll move forward. And we have to move forward. So we've laid the path, follow the plasma highway, and you can drive at your own speed. And if you want to go at uranium speed, that's your business. Okay, just, you know, remember, you have to lead or follow or get out of the way. So when we get on the plasma highway, there's no speed limit. Thank you all for allowing me to present today, and thank you for your wonderful questions. I'm really honored to be part of this process.
Okay, thank you again, Alex. And all the souls are working together, regardless of what we see in the physicality. But it's beautiful to see the Brazilian work and all they've put together to share, and within their own structure. So we thank the Brazil team. Anyone else have anything they'd like to add at this point? I'm going to play something that Azar has put in, and then the final disclaimer, and the meeting will come to an end. And of course, this is about reaching into your pocket to help the foundation. And it's not so much about money, it's about serving and sharing the knowledge, but the foundation doesn't run on air alone. Mr. Kesh has been reaching into his pocket for 20 years or more and financing. So we all need to maybe reach in a little deeper, even if it's only a small amount. I think Mr. Kesh is matching some of these amounts with his own personal funds. And I just thought I'd like to play this. Again, it's a touchy point in a way, but I think we'll come around to giving a little bit more than we have given. Anyone else have a final thought they'd like to add? If not, I'll take the screen. Thank you, Alex. Thanks to all the knowledge seekers.